All right, everybody, welcome back to the dungeon. This is Dan flying solo again. That's why you're hearing me, not Tom. Rather less used to doing the whole introductory thing, so I imagine I'll just keep it kind of short. Continuing with the theme, the goblins have drugged Tom out of our dungeon. I don't know where he went, but I suspect he's being beaten. So we'll just have to ask him about that next time when he comes back. In the meantime, I have a much more pleasant afternoon ahead of me here, interviewing Jaime Leonard. She is the proprietress of D20 Dinner. She is a dice maker. She is one who has helped us out with our summer camp. It was one of the highlights of the summer camp for the kids. They mentioned that quite a bit. And we've already heard rumblings that kids are very excited about a possible return visit. So we'll talk about that probably later. But for right now, Jaime, welcome to the dungeon.
Thank you. Very happy to be here.
Well, we are really excited to have you here too. Can't wait to get into learning a little bit about this art. But to start with, we always like to ask a little bit about how you got into Dungeons and Dragons. So what is your story?
Well, I've known about Dungeons and Dragons for a while, but I was always really, really nervous to play because I always had the mindset that I was going to be really bad at role play, and that was really intimidating to me. I was always like, I'm not creative enough. I can't come up with, what to say or what to do. And so that really intimidated me. And I was just like, this is it. Like, I'm not doing it. I'm not going to play this game because it's too much. And so my friends and I love board games. We've been playing board games forever, and we especially love legacy games. So Pandemic Legacy or Betrayal at House on the Hill Legacy, those kinds of games. And so we were playing, I think it was Pandemic Legacy or maybe Betrayal Legacy. I can't remember which one we did first, but we were getting toward the end of that game, and one of our friends, Alex, was like, hey, I would love if I could run a D&D campaign for you guys after this. And I was like, oh, I don't know. That's not really like my thing. And he was like, just give it a try. If you hate it, we'll stop. If you like it, we'll keep playing. And we were like, okay, sure, we'll try it. One campaign is all we'll commit to. So we finished our legacy game, board game, and we get together for our first session 0 of our campaign. And he's walking me through how to make a character. I'm like, Alex, I don't get any of this. I'm playing a bard because I'm like, well, I know music, but I'm kind of afraid to play a musical bard because I don't want to sing at the table. So I was like, I'll just become an artistic bard and a teacher because I'm a teacher. And, so I made this character who's very true to kind of who I am. That was kind of my little tiny footstep into the game. And then about 3 weeks later, I was all in, I haven't turned back since then. So
nice. So just a follow-up question to that, you've sort of answered it, but would you have any advice then for a person who's intrigued but nervous about the role play like you were?
Yeah, I think that make sure that the people you're playing with, have at least one person there who you're really comfortable with, because, I played the campaign I play in is with my 4 best friends and my husband, people who I'm really comfortable with, people that I know really well. But even if I was playing with some strangers, I would say just having someone who is comforting to you or who can support you, that's a big thing for me, just to feel supported. Also, don't be afraid to ask questions because Dungeons and Dragons has so many rules and there's no way you can ever remember all of them. And I've been playing the same campaign for 3 years now, and we are still I play a bard, so I'm a magic cat, a magic user. And I still don't know really how to hit with a sword, right? So I'm like, just ask questions. If you're stuck, if you're confused, ask questions. Don't be afraid to help your DM guide you, help the other players guide you, because really it's collaborative. It's bouncing ideas off of each other. If you have an idea, just throw it out there. It might be stupid. It might be great. It might be comic relief that everybody needed at that moment. So to me, I kind of jumped into it as playing third person at first, where I would say, oh, Callie does this and Callie says this. And that helped me kind of take myself out of it because it wasn't as personal then. But now I'm all in, like I am Callie and Callie is me. And, so I think just whatever way makes you feel most comfortable, I think is how you should play it, at least to start.
So another thing you said that kind of caught my attention, you said you created this character to be similar to you. Did that help make the process easier? And I guess connected to that, has the character now you've been playing for a while, has it diverged from who you are? How has that worked for you?
So I play a halfling bard who is a kind of like a one-room schoolhouse teacher in her shire. She's the teacher who has all these kids that she's been mentoring, but she's curious about the world and wants to explore. And so she is a hopeless romantic. I'm a hopeless romantic. She loves teaching. I'm a fourth grade teacher. She is musical. She's artistic. I started off my education career like in music education and now I'm in elementary. And so those are all aspects of myself that I put into her. Since then, she has become so much more than just that little box that I had put her in. She and I still have a lot in common, but she has really, like, the experiences that we've had, different situations that we've been put throughout this campaign have definitely changed her a lot. So I would say there are definitely some major differences between her and I now. Like, she just kind of made a deal with the devil. Like, I don't think I'd ever make a deal with the devil, right? But like there's just a lot. But I think it's one of the most exciting things is that you never know where you're going to go. 3 years ago, I never would have thought that she would be making a deal with a goddess of revenge to like avenge her dead fiance. It's so there's a lot that she is now, and she has become such a deep and developed character that's so dear to my heart, but has really evolved into her own person.
It's fascinating how these creations do feel like living people after a while that
Yeah.
That's really interesting to me. I don't know what it says about me, but I tend to kind of go opposite in that I tend to create characters of who I would want to be rather than who I think I am. So that's really fascinating to hear that nothing else, I think it suggests a pretty secure sense of self that this is me and this is what I'm putting out there. That's really cool.
I think that when we build characters and develop our characters, they really do shine and show aspects of who we want to be. Callie is this ultra confident leader of her group, knows what she wants and is going to get it no matter what it takes. And I am kind of a pushover,
Right.
I think that she does have those qualities of, man, I would love to be this way, or I would love to be so self-confident that I don't even care what anyone else thinks of me, But I think that's something really cool. Dungeons and Dragons is a place where we can just hop into this fantasy world and forget about everything else and just like be this person that maybe we feel like we can't be or that we want to be, or practice things that we need to do in the real world,
Yes, I would agree with that. I know that, to the extent that I've looked into how RPGs are used in education, one of the most powerful things for students is the chance to try social situations in a low risk way. And I find myself doing that with characters too. What is it like to get in somebody's face and actually say, I don't care what it takes. I'm not allowing you to do this. Because I'm like you. I would never, in real life, that's not.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's a teacher thing to always look for the calm solution, but yes, that definitely wouldn't be me. I think you've already answered this, but is there anything else you would add as far as what's your favorite part about Dungeons and Dragons? What is it that keeps you hooked?
Well, one of the things that my DM does specifically is that I can get like an extra +1 to every d20 roll if I don't have my phone. So when I walk in, I put my phone in my bag, and like my family and my friends know that on Sunday evenings or Sunday afternoons, I am unreachable. And if they need me, they need to call my husband. And so, because I take my watch off, I put my phone away. So this is like my time where the rest of the world goes away, and I just get to spend time with my friends and my husband, rolling dice, playing pretend, living in this fantasy world for, 4 to 6 hours on a Sunday afternoon, where that's all I have to think about. And I just get to enjoy, being with people that I enjoy being with.
What a clever DM. That's a really good way to use positive reinforcement to get people to put their phones away.
And I'm the only one from my group who actually takes advantage of that. The other 4 players use their phones to keep track of spells or, whatever. Sure. But I just keep a player handbook right with me at all times and have spells written down that aren't in there. And I actually have some spell cards now so that I don't have to flip as many pages. But I just hate, I want to be disconnected from everything else. I want to be solely focused on this game because I feel like I would miss so much more if I had a phone even just near me.
Right. I'm old enough that it's just, I don't like a screen for that kind of, I don't want to I like the paper and pencil to keep track of my characters. So I see people using it and I see how efficient it is to have a tablet or whatever, but I'm like, nope, I can't do it. It doesn't feel right. Takes me out of the moment or something, I guess. You mentioned your bard and the whole singing thing. Yeah, I don't sing I play a bard. I don't sing in front of the players, but what I do is when they are engaged in role play and my character is a little bit at loose ends, I'll write down song titles so I can at least tell them, okay, this is the song that's being performed right now. So for me, that's kind of been a workaround for actual performance anxiety or whatever.
Yeah. And I actually I do that a little bit too, where I'm not writing down song titles as much, but sometimes I'll grab my husband's phone or go grab my phone from the bag and look up, go to YouTube and say Hips Don't Lie tavern version or, something like that. And find
and it's there. That's the most amazing.
And so I'll say, oh, well, I get up and I'm going to go perform on stage and I chug an ale, slam it down on the stage in front of me for a tip jar. And then I start to perform and I hit play and they hear whatever song I've chosen in that moment. And they're like, oh my gosh, you've done it again. So.
Nice. Nice. That's the appropriate use of technology. That's perfect.
Yeah.
So we got to know you because you make dice. Mm-hmm. And this is something that just is kind of personally fascinating to me, the whole process. So could you just kind of talk me through how did you get into dice making? What made you decide to try it? How it's going for you?
Yeah, so I started making dice in January of 2021. I was kind of scrolling through TikTok one day and a video popped up of someone who had made dice that had little confetti in them, like little holographic confetti. And I was like, those are cool. I feel like I could make that. I'm pretty artistic, I could just try that out. So I ordered some cheap dice molds that are terrible and I would never recommend anyone using. But I ordered them. My friend Dave had some resin at his house and he was like, oh, I've got some resin. I've used it for some project. You can use it, come on over, bring dice molds and we'll make these. And because he is a Dungeons and Dragons lover, he played in a campaign with my mom many years back. I don't remember how long ago it was now, but he's always been, the one who paints his own minis and has 3D printers and runs his own campaigns. And so he's a fantastic guy. He's got his own YouTube channel where he streams his games. And so he had said, hey, let me help you with this. I've got some resin. Come on over and we'll try this out. So we tried it out, went horribly, figured out what we did wrong. And then I was like, well, okay, I'll just take this stuff. He's like, you just take it back to your house. See if you can figure it out. See if you can make one work. So I took it back to my house and I tried it another time. And I got a couple dice, like I think 2 or 3 that turned out as dice. One of them didn't have the 1 on them. So I like just painted it on and that kind of thing. And then my mom bought me a starter resin kit that came with some dried flowers and some alcohol ink and another set of resin, like resin and hardener, and a couple like stirring sticks. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to try this again. Let me buy an actual mold, because by then I had, hopped on YouTube, and there's a channel on YouTube called Ribinator, who is the guy who most dice makers have watched his videos to learn how to make dice, because he's kind of the one who started it all for us and was like, I'm going to make these videos to teach other people how to do this and how to make molds and how to make dice and how to convert a paint pressure pot into a resin pressure pot and all that stuff. I went on a binge of watching his videos for hours and hours and hours, and said, okay, I got this. I'm going to buy a mold that's going to be good, because I don't trust myself to make one right now. And then I'm going to try it out. And so I used an actual good mold, and then I had some dice that were functional. And I was like, okay, these are kind of ugly, but they work. So from there, I was like, well, okay, these are kind of still not great, but maybe I can make some character dice. And so I made some dice for one of the characters in our campaign, who's named Origin. He's a Warforged paladin. And I basically took 3 different colors of foil, of craft foils. So I used silver, gold, and rose gold, mixed them all together, dumped them in the mold with some resin, and they came out looking like ore, basically. And I was like, perfect, that's great. And so I gave them to him, and he was like, these are awesome. I'm like, how did you do that? And I was like, okay, there we go. And then I was hooked.
I bet. So you've kind of already said it, but if you could, I mean, I imagine there are a lot of people that are somewhat familiar. I'm not really familiar. So what is the actual process of start to finish of creating dice?
So you have to start with a mold, usually silicone mold, and you mix up your resin just in whatever the instructions tell you to do. It depends on the resin. Mine is a 50-50. So it's half resin, half hardener. Mix those together. And then depending on what you're doing, you'll add either alcohol inks to color the resin or mica powders. You can add dried flowers, glitter, confetti, kind of whatever you want to include. I've used a whole bunch of different types of inclusions in dice, whether those are store-bought or handmade or, tons of different things. So you put in whatever coloring you want into your resin, and then whatever inclusions you want in there. Sometimes you put them directly into the mold. Sometimes they're in the resin and you pour them in. And so you pour the resin into the mold, cap it up, put the lid on top, because the lid has all the ones on it. So all the different numbers are inside the mold, and then the lid has all the ones. So you close it up, and then I put them into a pressure pot, and the pressure pot basically makes the bubbles so small that you can't see them anymore, so that you don't have any air inside the resin to throw your balance off. And so you put those in the pressure pot, seal it up with an air compressor, and let those sit for 24 hours typically. Then I take them out of the pressure pot and demold them. So I just pop them out of the mold. And then I usually let them sit for another day or 2, but then I sand up the sides and any of them that have imperfections on them, just make sure all the faces are smooth and even. And then you polish them up. I use a tumbler to polish them, but some people do it by hand. It just takes forever that way. So I sped up my process quite a bit, about a year and a half ago, maybe. And so I use a tumbler now to finish all my dice. And then you use paint to paint all the numbers in. So that's kind of start to finish. It takes about, if I was working on it consistently and didn't have any days where I didn't do work on dice when I should have been working on dice, it would take about a week. But it usually, if there's a custom order and it's pretty simple order, I tell them 1 to 2 weeks. If it's something where I have to make something on my own, whether it's out of clay or out of resin or, order something or get something from a craft store, then I usually add an extra week on there. So it could be done in about a week. The quickest I've made a set is about 5 days, but that's really pushing it.
So is balance an issue? When you put inclusions in, does that affect a die's balance in any way, or how do you deal with that?
So balance is a huge question throughout the dice and TTRPG community. A lot of people are concerned when it comes to handmade dice, are they balanced? That's one of the most common questions that dice makers get. It's also one of the most frustrating questions that dice makers get online because people can be really aggressive about it. But when you're getting handmade dice, it's almost less likely that they'll be unbalanced. They're probably more likely to be balanced if they're handmade than factory made, because your factory made dice, if they're not clear, you could cut those open and they could have tons of bubbles inside just from the factory made process. Handmade dice are more likely to be balanced because we use pressure pots consistently, and we make sure that as we're pouring, we're degassing it and we're getting the bubbles out and that kind of thing. The materials that you can fit inside dice are so small that they usually don't matter. But if I were to put metal inside of it, then I would just make sure that that is directly in the center of the die so that it's not weighted to one side. But typically we don't have to worry about balance because the materials we use are so light or the same weight as the resin that it doesn't matter in the long run. So if it is something that's heavier than the resin, then we would just make sure we keep it in the middle of the die somehow, whether that's doing multiple layers of a cure, pouring it about halfway, letting it cure, and then putting it in the middle and letting it cure, topping it off and curing again. Or if that's, putting it on a little pedestal. I've seen someone make a little resin pedestal to set something on so that it stays in the middle. Wow. But typically the things that can fit inside a die are so small that the weight is almost a moot point at that point.
Okay, that makes sense. Have you done much with the more advanced techniques yet?
I would say advanced techniques is a really broad term because when you're making dice, when you make dice, every dice maker has their kind of niche of what they're really good at. They've kind of come up with, something that they are really good at. They can make in a whole bunch of different colors and they can make consistently with similar results. One of the hardest things about dice making is your mold is not clear, so you can't tell what the dice are going to look like until you demold them. So you pour something, you kind of cross your fingers, and then 24 hours later you go, did it work?
That would be the thing that would just drive me crazy. I don't know how I would deal with that.
Yeah. So there are definitely some techniques that take some trial and error to figure out. But there are also some designs that I've made and that other dice makers have made that were complete accident because we were trying to do something else, but turned out really cool. Some of the hardest dice, I would say, there's one that's called a Petri style pour, which is one that I know you've seen recently. It kind of looks like you dropped, we call it a Petri pour because it almost looks like a Petri dish where stuff is growing in it, but it's kind of like tendrils coming down into the dice. That style is really hard because you often get soft cures where the resin doesn't fully cure because the amount of alcohol ink that you put into the resin can sometimes be too much. And it's a really fragile balance there. So that's probably one of the more challenging ones. Sometimes you want to get a specific effect, and if the resin is too hot or too cold, if it's too hot, it could flash cure on you, so the working time of the resin is really short. Or if it's too cold, then it doesn't swirl the way you want, or it takes longer to cure, so it settles more. So that would be kind of the harder part of it. some things that seem like they would, like you look at dice and you go, wow, this must have been complicated to make. Some of those are actually simpler than they seem because of materials we use or specific techniques. So it's kind of hard to answer that question, but I've made tons of different styles. I can mostly look at a die and figure out now how someone made that or what I could try to do to replicate it. But even then, we just kind of do things with our own flair and see what works.
From the time you began to now, what was the fail rate like for your dice?
So there have only been, let's see, maybe 10 to 20 sets that I've made that like the set failed. I've been able to repair quite a few of them. So sometimes if I demold a set and one of the dice has a little hole in the top where it's just like there was a bubble there. And so it's not like there's just a little divot in the top. I can actually put in some UV resin and cure that to fill the hole so that I can repair it. So sets like that, which technically failed, but I was able to repair, wouldn't be considered a fail anymore. My biggest fail was probably when I forgot to pressurize my pressure pot. And that was really bad because I actually had a set of rainbow dice in there that was on its 7th cure because I was pouring it layer by layer. And so this was like the 7th day.
No.
Like the final layer, and then I forgot to pressurize the pot, and every set in there failed because they were completely full of bubbles, and that's not able to. But yeah, I wouldn't say very many fail. I think sometimes design ideas I have fail, but I can turn them into something else. So that's kind of the nice thing about dice making is when I'm not making a set for a specific order or something like that, no one really knows what I was trying to do. So I can kind of play it off as a success by using a different ink color or, just standing it a certain way. Like I had a set recently that I thought was really, really ugly and I hated it. I was like, no one's ever going to buy it. And then I started sanding it and kind of noticed that the matte icy finish on it made the colors pop really well and it didn't look brown anymore. And I was like, hey, this looks pretty cool. So I just never polished it, just left it sanded and matte and then finished it that way. And now they look really cool. And I actually sold one of the sets like that just recently. So that was a moment where I was like, man, these are kind of crappy, but I ended up being able to make them work in a different way.
So it sounds like this is a hobby. Maybe there's a lot of hobbies like this, but it's a hobby where you can kind of make it as complex as you want. That, I mean, to my mind, even at its basic level, it still sounds pretty complex, but it sounds like you can keep adding little twists as you go along.
Yeah, I think this is a craft that is constantly evolving. And dice makers are constantly trying to push the envelope to see how far we can go with them, to see what new stuff we can put into them. I know people have put beans into dice to try and make baked bean dice. And I saw someone recently who made tiny little dragon, hand painted dragons and put them inside dice and made them look like dragon eggs, and people who make geodes. Dice that look like geodes, and there are so many cool styles of dice that it's a never-ending experiment. And I would say I've probably made the same style of set, maybe I've made one style probably 6 times, and then everything else I've pretty much just made once. I've made a couple that I've someone said, I really like this. Could you make it again? And so there are a couple that I've done twice, but most of it is I just kind of see what I'm interested in that day or what color I haven't used in a while and do something with that. Or if I'm totally out of ideas, I'll go live on TikTok and people will join and say, hey, make blue dice. Hey, make dice that are sparkly. Hey, make dice that do this or look like fire. And so other people help too in saying can you do this? Can you do this? So
that is a good sales angle that if people purchase from you, they're pretty sure that this is a unique set. There's not going to be others out there that look like that dice. That's really cool. You've kind of answered, but I'm curious, what would you say are your favorite parts of dice making? What parts are you not so excited about or you find more challenging?
I think my favorite part of dice making is seeing my dice out in the wild. Like seeing someone rolling my dice, and like our dungeon master has one die that I made, like one d20 that I made for him that has rolled so many like natural 20s. And like, we hate that as players, but I'm like, man, like he loves that die. And it's just like seeing the joy people get out of something that I put all this time and effort into, I think is my favorite part. I also love that I just get to be creative with it, and I get some idea in my head and I'm like, I'm just going to try and figure it out. And so I'm constantly learning and evolving this craft. And I'm a teacher, so I love learning. And this is a topic that I can never stop learning about. And there's always more to learn and more to try and experiment with. You asked for the hardest part too, right?
Yes.
So that would probably be, occasionally I get either an idea or someone says, hey, I have this character idea, and we have to kind of figure out exactly what that's going to look like. That is probably also one of my favorite things, is making character dice, but it's also one of the most challenging because you know how near and dear characters are to our hearts. And being able to take an identity or a, aspect of a character and put it into something physical is such a challenge. But it's also, I get that experience of being able to talk to someone about this character that I don't know anything about. And I just say, tell me about your character. Send me pictures of your character. Tell me what they've done recently. Tell me what are, the most important parts of this character, important physical aspects of this character. And then taking that time to really think through it and figure out what will make the best dice for that character. What will exude that character's like essence, basically. And so I've done character dice for a bunch of strangers who I knew nothing about their characters, nothing about their campaigns. And I got to learn a lot about them. Like there was one who was a green dragonborn, and he had recently like had his mouth sewn shut and with this like red thread. And so I was I was in the midst of experimenting with dice that looked like dragon scales. And so I was like, wait, I actually am like kind of working on this right now. Let me see if I can make some green dragon scale dice. And so I made these blanks, which are basically a slightly smaller version of each die. And then you put them in the regular mold and to get the numbers on them. So I made the blanks to look like green dragon scales, and then put this this piece of red thread throughout, surrounding the blank, and then put that into the die. And it turned out so cool. And I never would have ever thought to do that. I never would have put this red thread with a dragon scale and then, but it turned out so cool. And that was really challenging. And I had to report a couple times and come up with some new ideas and ways of doing it. But it ended up being really, really cool. I would say that's probably the most challenging, but also part of the most exciting.
That must be hard to put your heart into something and then not quite know if the customer's going to be as enthused about it as you are. That's awesome that you do that. But yeah, I would be nervous about that.
Yeah. And there have been some where I send them pictures after I pull them out and I'm like, what do you think? And there have been times where they're like, this isn't really what I was thinking. Could you do this? Or could we try this instead? Or they'll say, do you have another idea? And so that's where I can say, yeah, let's scrap it. Let's try something else, And the nice thing is I can still finish up those dice that they didn't love and repurpose them for something else, or someone else will love those dice for their character, or just because they like those colors, or, that kind of thing. So Yeah, it's definitely challenging. There are times where I send pictures to a client and they say, I'm like, please like it, please like it, please like it. And then
Right.
they say, it looks great. And that's just like, the biggest sigh of relief of, okay, good. Like that's what they were hoping for.
I have to admit, talking to you, this is one of those things that intrigues me, but I don't know that I would handle the frustration of, oh, that didn't turn out. But you've almost tempted me into dipping my toe in the water here. So, so as we finish up, I would like you to have a chance to kind of tell people about your shop, and I mean, we just tell us a little about your dice making and how people could take a look at what you got for sale or just contact you.
Yeah, absolutely. So my biggest platform right now is on TikTok. I actually started a couple years ago, even a little bit before I started making dice. So kind of like middle of 2020, end of 2020. I approached my husband. I was like, hey, I'm really tired of having tacos every night. Can we find a more exciting way to figure out what's for dinner? And so I said, what if we wrote down 20 things and we rolled a d20 and that's what we had for dinner? And he was like, okay, yeah, sounds good. Why don't I make a spreadsheet and we can make multiple sheets? And so we started rolling for dinner. And that was right before the big roll for whatever trend kind of took off on TikTok. And so we were like, yeah, let's do this. We're going to start rolling for dinner. And so through that, other people were like, yeah, I'm tired of choosing what's for dinner too. This sounds fun. And so TikTok is my biggest platform at the moment. That's just D20 dinner on TikTok, spelled exactly how it sounds. And that is where we have, we post our dinners, we post recipes there. I post videos of dice, demolding dice, all that kind of stuff. That's also where I go live if I go live to pour or to work on dice at all. I also post pictures of all of my dice on Instagram and Threads and Facebook. On Instagram and Threads, I am D20 Dinner. And then I can also be found on Facebook at D20 Dinner Handcrafted Resin Dice. That is a pretty new page. I just actually made it on Thanksgiving for a Black Friday and Small Business Saturday sale. So that one's pretty new, but I'm trying to consistently post pictures of all the completed dice that I have and any sales I have running through there and on Instagram and Threads. The best place to see a full kind of scope of dice that I've made is on Instagram, just because that's consistently where I've been posting pictures of dice for 2 years now. But then I also, I try to engage with people a little bit more on Threads. That's kind of more of a social platform for me rather than a business one. And then Facebook is kind of where I'm going to be doing most marketing. I'm also hoping to have a shop up and running in the next probably 3 months or so. I'm working on getting an official, business going with that and a website up and running with that so that I can step my way into conventions and online sales and that kind of stuff. So all my sales right now are just personal through Instagram, or email is the best way to reach me, but you can get access to all of my links if you go to any of my social medias. There's a link tree in every bio that you can find there.
Yes, and I can attest that you're quick to respond, and so it sounds like it's fairly easy for people to make contact and start figuring out what kind of dice you have and can make. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
And anyone who's local to the Peoria, Central Illinois area can also buy dice in person at Cabbages and Kings in Peoria Heights. So I keep about 8 to 10 sets there at a time typically. So if you want to go and look at some in person and just see what they actually look like in person, then that's a good place to go, is Cabbages and Kings.
Yeah. Oh, that's smart, actually. That is a good idea to have some physical ones out there for people to see. And yeah, I've taken advantage of that. That's where I got my daughter's Christmas present last year. So went over well. So trying it again.
Yeah. And I actually have a second location that has dice at it. It's just I don't get very many sales there, so I never think to mention it. But I keep some dice in stock at Escape Town Peoria in Peoria. They're an escape room company that I used to work for. I used to be one of their managers. And so I just keep a small display there as well that has some other options if you're interested in those. But that's Escape Town Peoria. They're open only when they have bookings. So if you're interested in looking at the dice there, you would probably need to call them ahead of time.
Sure. Well, I'm excited to see. We'll definitely have to keep in touch and see what cons you start going to as that starts to build up for you. That's exciting as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I was hoping to go to PeoriaCon this year as a seller, but we ended up getting a wedding invitation in South Carolina for the same weekend. So we're not going to be able to do that, but definitely hoping to get that one next year or in 2025 instead of 24. And then any other ones, small ones that pop up around here, I'm hoping to go to as well.
Very good. Very good. Well, thank you so much for your time, Jamie. I know I've learned a lot about dice making here and definitely has inspired me. Hopefully listeners too are willing to give it a try, or if it's beyond what they want to do, they'll still see what you have to sell and experience it that way.
Yeah. And if anyone ever decides to dip their toes in those waters and give it a shot, it is challenging, but if you need any advice or help, I'm always happy to help new dice makers as well and give advice or, say, hey, maybe don't do this because that worked out horribly for me, that kind of stuff. So feel free to reach out on any social media and I'm happy to help as well.
All right. Well, for Teachers in the Dungeon, thank you, Jamie Leonard, for sharing your story about dice making and Dungeons and Dragons in general. This will post a little before Christmas, so people might have some time to see what you've got on offer if there's some last-minute gifts they want to, particularly in the Peoria area, that they want to pick up.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Thanks again, Jamie. Yes, and on behalf of Tom, I will go ahead and use his saying. I think I can hear him. They're returning him now, the goblins, so I better go see what kind of medical check he needs. But until then, keep rolling those 20s.